My name is Elena Rosewood, and 6 months ago, I was living what most people would call a perfectly ordinary life. I worked as a senior marketing executive at a mid-sized advertising firm in downtown Millbrook Heights, earning enough to afford a cozy apartment with a view of the city skyline and weekend trips to the farmer's market, where I'd buy fresh flowers and artisanal coffee. Nothing extravagant, nothing that would make headlines, just a comfortable existence built on hard work and careful budgeting. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But ordinary lives have a way of colliding with extraordinary circumstances when you least expect them. That collision came on a rainy Thursday evening in March, when I was working late at the office, reviewing campaign proposals under the harsh fluorescent lights that made everything look slightly sickly. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, and normally I would have ignored it. Spam messages were constant these days, promising everything from miracle weight loss to cryptocurrency riches. Something made me look at this one. Maybe it was intuition, maybe it was fate, or maybe I was just tired enough to be curious about anything that wasn't another quarterly report. The message was simple. Elena, this is Victoria Ashworth from Ashworth Communications. We have a proposition that might interest you. Are you available for lunch tomorrow? Victoria Ashworth. Even someone like me, who didn't move in elite circles, knew that name. Ashworth Communications was the premier public relations firm for the ultra-wealthy, handling everything from political campaigns to crisis management for billionaires whose scandals could topple governments. They represented tech moguls, oil heiresses, entertainment dynasties, and old money families whose influence stretched back generations. I stared at the message for a full minute, wondering if this was some kind of elaborate joke. Why would Victoria Ashworth want to meet with me? My firm handled local restaurant chains and small retail businesses. We weren't exactly in the same league as people who charged six figures just to return a phone call. But curiosity won over skepticism. I texted back, "I'm available. Where and when?" The response came immediately. Le Bernardin, 12:30 p.m. I'll make the reservation. Wear something professional but not flashy. We have a lot to discuss. Le Bernardin was the kind of restaurant where CEOs made deals that affected thousands of jobs, and where socialites planned charity galas that raised millions for causes they'd never personally experienced. The kind of place where a single meal cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. I'd never set foot inside, but I'd walked past it countless times, always feeling like I was glimpsing a world that existed parallel to mine but never intersected with it. That night, I barely slept. I kept running through possibilities in my mind, each more unlikely than the last. Maybe they wanted to poach me for my expertise in grassroots marketing. Maybe they needed someone who understood how ordinary people thought and felt. Maybe this was all a case of mistaken identity, and I'd show up to find Victoria Ashworth looking confused and checking her phone for the right Elena. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that makes the whole city look like an old photograph. I chose my outfit carefully. A navy blazer I'd bought for job interviews 3 years ago, a white blouse that I'd had dry cleaned twice but rarely wore, and black slacks that were professional without trying too hard to impress. Victoria had said not flashy, and I took that instruction seriously. Le Bernardin was exactly as intimidating as I'd imagined. The maitre d' looked at me with the kind of polite assessment that rich people probably never noticed, but that made everyone else acutely aware of whether they belonged. I gave Victoria's name, and his expression shifted to something approaching respect. "Right this way, miss. Ms. Ashworth is waiting for you." She was seated at a corner table that offered privacy without isolation, the kind of spot where important conversations happened away from curious ears, but with full visibility of everyone who mattered in the room. Victoria Ashworth was in her 50s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and a black suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She had the kind of understated confidence that came from never having to prove herself to anyone. "Elena," she said, rising to shake my hand. Her grip was firm, businesslike. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit down." I settled into the chair across from her, trying not to gawk at the other diners. 2 tables over, I recognized a tech entrepreneur whose face had been on magazine covers. Near the window, a woman I was pretty sure was a senator's wife was having an animated conversation with someone who looked like they might run a major art museum. "I imagine you're wondering why I asked you here," Victoria said. signaling the waiter with a subtle gesture that somehow conveyed exactly what she wanted without any apparent communication. The thought had crossed my mind, I admitted. She smiled, and for the first time she looked almost maternal. I've been watching your work for some time, Elena. Your campaign for Harrison's Hardware was particularly impressive. You took a family business that was being crushed by big box stores and turned them into a beloved community institution. That kind of authentic storytelling is rare in our business. I felt a flush of pride. The Harrison's campaign had been one of my favorites, working with 3 generations of a family who genuinely cared about their customers and their neighborhood. We'd focused on the personal relationships, the expert advice, the way they remembered customers' names and their projects. It had been the kind of campaign that felt good to work on. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But that's not really why I'm here, Victoria continued. I need someone with your particular combination of skills and background for a very delicate situation. Someone who understands both sides of a story that's about to become very public. The waiter appeared with water and menus, moving with the kind of practiced invisibility that expensive restaurants perfected. Victoria waited until he was gone before continuing. One of our clients is getting married next weekend. Jasper Blackstone. My blood turned to ice. Jasper Blackstone. I hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 5 years, but it still hit me like a physical blow. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for my water glass, and I hoped Victoria didn't notice. She noticed everything. I can see you recognize the name, she said gently. That's exactly why we need you. Jasper Blackstone was more than just a name from my past. He was the reason I'd moved to Millbrook Heights 5 years ago, why I'd changed jobs, why I'd spent countless nights rebuilding myself from the ground up. He was my first love, my biggest heartbreak, and the ghost that still haunted every relationship I'd tried to have since. We'd met in college, 2 kids from middle-class families who'd earned scholarships to Princeton and felt like imposters among the children of senators and oil barons. Jasper was studying computer science with a focus on artificial intelligence. Back when AI was still considered science fiction by most people, I was majoring in communications, dreaming of working for a nonprofit that actually made a difference in the world. For 3 years, we were inseparable. We studied together in the library until security kicked us out. We split instant ramen in his dorm room and called it gourmet dining. We talked about changing the world, about building something meaningful together, about the kind of life we'd have after graduation. He was brilliant, funny, kind, and completely unimpressed by the wealth that surrounded us on campus. He saw through the pretensions and the inherited advantages to the real people underneath. I thought we'd last forever. I was naive enough to believe that love could overcome anything, including the massive fortune that Jasper inherited when his grandfather died during our senior year. Suddenly, the boy who'd been content with pizza and movies was worth $800 million. The transition should have been gradual, should have been something we navigated together. Instead, it was like watching someone I loved disappear behind a wall of money, lawyers, financial advisors, and social obligations that had never existed before. The worst part wasn't the money itself. It was watching how it changed him, or maybe revealed parts of him I'd never seen. The pressure from his family, the expectations, the constant scrutiny from people who wanted to use him or marry him or invest with him. He became someone I didn't recognize, someone who forgot to return my calls and canceled dates for business meetings and started talking about responsibilities and family legacy, like they were more important than everything we'd built together. The end came not with a dramatic fight, but with a conversation in a coffee shop near campus, 3 weeks before graduation. He told me he was moving to Switzerland to oversee his family's European investments. He told me he needed to focus on learning the business. He told me he hoped I'd understand. What he didn't tell me, what I found out later through mutual friends, was that his family had already begun arranging introductions with suitable women from other wealthy families, women who understood the responsibilities that came with that kind of money, women who'd been raised for exactly this kind of life, women who weren't scholarship kids from Ohio who dreamed of changing the world. I graduated, moved to Millbrook Heights, and spent 5 years building a life that had nothing to do with Jasper Blackstone or the world he'd chosen over what we'd had together. I dated other people, focused on my career, made friends who knew nothing about my college heartbreak, I thought I'd moved on. Sitting across from Victoria Ashworth, I realized how wrong I'd been. His fiancée is Vivienne Sterling, Victoria continued, watching my face carefully. Daughter of Harrison Sterling, the pharmaceutical heiress. It's being called the wedding of the decade. 300 guests, international media coverage, and enough security to protect a small country. I knew the name Vivienne Sterling from gossip magazines and society pages. Blonde, beautiful, accomplished in the way that rich women were accomplished. Art history degree from Yale, board positions at 3 charities, a lifestyle brand that sold overpriced candles and wellness products to other wealthy women who wanted to feel like they were supporting female entrepreneurship. What does this have to do with me? I asked, though I was starting to suspect I knew the answer. Victoria leaned forward slightly. There's going to be a problem at this wedding. Vivienne's mother, Cordelia Sterling, has never approved of Jasper. She thinks he's new money trying to buy his way into old society. She's been vocal about it in private, and we have reason to believe she's planning something public at the reception. Something public? A scene. An embarrassment. Something designed to humiliate Jasper in front of everyone who matters in their world. Victoria's voice was professionally calm, but I could hear the underlying tension. We need someone there who can help manage the situation if it gets out of hand. Someone who understands Jasper well enough to know how he'll react, and someone with the skills to help control the narrative afterward. I stared at her, trying to process what she was asking. You want me to go to my ex-boyfriend's wedding to help with damage control when his future mother-in-law tries to humiliate him? I want you to go as part of the catering staff, Victoria said smoothly. Invisible, professional, there to observe and intervene only if necessary. You'll be well compensated. And it's only one evening. How well compensated? $50,000. I nearly choked on my water. $50,000 was more than I made in 6 months. It was enough to pay off my student loans, to finally take the vacation I'd been promising myself for 3 years, to have the kind of financial cushion that would let me take risks with my career. It was also a terrible idea for about a dozen reasons, starting with the fact that seeing Jasper get married to someone else would probably destroy whatever emotional progress I'd made over the past 5 years. Why me? I asked. You could hire anyone for this. Professional security, crisis management experts, people who actually know what they're doing in these situations. Victoria smiled again, and this time, it was almost sad. Because Elena, when Cordelia Sterling does whatever she's planning to do, it's not going to be about business or money or social status. It's going to be personal. She's going to try to hurt Jasper in the most devastating way possible, and the only way to counter that is with someone who truly understands what matters to him. She paused, letting that sink in. 5 years ago, you mattered to him more than anything else in the world. His family made sure that ended, but it doesn't change what was true then. If Cordelia Sterling wants to wound him, she'll attack the part of him that's still vulnerable. The part that remembers what he gave up. I felt tears threatening and blinked them back quickly. This was exactly why I'd spent 5 years avoiding anything that reminded me of Jasper. Because even now, even after everything, it still hurt to think about what we'd lost. I need time to think about it, I said. Of course. Victoria signaled for the check. But I need an answer by Monday. The wedding is next Saturday, and if you're going to do this, we'll need time to prepare. She handed me a business card with her direct number. Elena, I know this is asking a lot, but sometimes the universe gives us a chance to close a chapter properly, to see the ending we never got. I took the card, my hands steadier now. What makes you think this will be an ending? What if it just opens old wounds? Then at least you'll know, Victoria said simply. At least you'll have the truth about what might have been, instead of spending the rest of your life wondering. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring out at the city lights and thinking about paths not taken. About the boy who'd held my hand through college and the man who'd walked away from everything we'd built together. About the life I'd created without him and the life I'd imagined we'd have together. $50,000 was a lot of money. But the real question wasn't about money. It was about whether I was brave enough to face the ghost that had been haunting me for 5 years, and whether I was strong enough to watch the love of my life marry someone else. By Monday morning, I had my answer. I called Victoria on Monday morning and accepted the job. The next 5 days passed in a blur of preparation that felt surreal, like I was training for a mission in a world I'd deliberately left behind. Victoria's team was thorough and professional, briefing me on everything from the guest list to the floor plan of the Grandview estate where the wedding would take place. The estate belonged to the Sterling family, a sprawling compound in the hills outside the city that had been in their family for 4 generations. It was the kind of place that appeared in architectural magazines and hosted charity galas that raised millions for causes the wealthy felt passionate about between courses of their 7-figure dinners. The main house was a Georgian mansion with 37 rooms, formal gardens that required a staff of 12 to maintain, and a ballroom that could accommodate 300 guests without feeling crowded. Victoria's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca, walked me through my cover story. I would be working with Prestige Catering, the most exclusive catering company on the East Coast, as part of their event coordination team. My job would be to ensure that everything ran smoothly during the reception, which meant I'd have legitimate reasons to be everywhere and see everything without drawing attention to myself. The key, Rebecca explained during one of our preparation sessions, is to be professionally invisible, efficient, helpful, but completely forgettable. The kind of person these people are so used to having around that they don't even notice you're listening. She provided me with a detailed dossier on the major players who would be attending. Cordelia Sterling, the mother of the bride, was 62 years old, a woman who'd inherited her pharmaceutical fortune from her father and spent the last 40 years using it to establish herself as one of the most influential people in high society. She served on the boards of 8 major charities, owned homes in 5 countries, and had a reputation for charm that could turn glacial when crossed. She's never liked Jasper, Rebecca noted. She thinks he's an upstart, new money trying to buy respectability. There have been reports that she's tried multiple times to convince Vivienne to break off the engagement. The dossier included photos of Cordelia at various social events over the years. She was an elegant woman with silver hair that never seemed to have a strand out of place, always dressed in clothes that whispered their expense rather than shouting it. But there was something in her eyes, a coldness that suggested she was capable of considerable cruelty when it served her purposes. Vivienne Sterling was 28, 3 years younger than me, and beautiful in the way that money and privilege allowed. Blonde hair that caught light like spun gold, perfect teeth, the kind of effortless grace that came from a lifetime of writing lessons and cotillion classes. She'd graduated magna cum laude from Yale with a degree in art history, spent 2 years working at a prestigious gallery in London, and had recently launched a lifestyle brand that sold artisanal candles and organic skincare products to wealthy women who wanted to feel like they were supporting female entrepreneurship. According to the research Victoria's team had done, Vivienne seemed genuinely kind, if somewhat naive about the world outside her privileged bubble. She volunteered at a literacy center for underprivileged children, donated generously to environmental causes, and had never been involved in any of the scandals that periodically rocked high society. She appeared to be everything Jasper's family would want in a wife: beautiful, accomplished, socially connected, and completely uncontroversial. Looking at her photo, I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to hate her, to find something to criticize or dismiss. But the truth was, she seemed lovely. She seemed like exactly the kind of person Jasper deserved to end up with. Someone whose life aligned perfectly with the world he'd chosen when he walked away from what we'd had together. That realization hurt more than I'd expected. It would have been easier if she'd been terrible. If I could have convinced myself that Jasper had made a mistake or settled for someone unworthy of him. Instead, I was forced to confront the possibility that he'd found someone better suited for the life he wanted to live. The most difficult part of the preparation was studying the information about Jasper himself. Victoria's team had compiled a comprehensive file tracking his activities over the past 5 years, and reading it was like watching a movie about someone I'd once known but no longer recognized. After college, he'd spent 6 months in Switzerland, learning about his family's European holdings, just as he'd told me he would. But instead of staying there, he'd returned to the States and thrown himself into expanding the family's technology investments. He'd shown an instinct for identifying promising startups, and had personally overseen investments in 3 companies that had gone on to be worth billions. More impressively, he'd started a foundation focused on educational technology for underserved communities. The Blackstone Education Initiative had funded computer labs in over 200 schools. provided scholarships for students from low-income families to attend coding boot camps, and created partnerships with major universities to increase access to STEM education for first-generation college students. Reading about his philanthropic work brought back memories of late-night conversations we'd had in college about using technology to address inequality and create opportunities for people who didn't have the advantages we'd been given. It seemed he'd found a way to honor those ideals within the constraints of his inherited wealth and family obligations. The photos included in his file showed a man who looked like the Jasper I'd known, but carried himself differently. He was still tall and lean, still had the dark hair that never quite stayed perfectly styled and the warm brown eyes that had made me fall in love with him in the first place. But there was something new in his posture, a kind of careful control that suggested he'd learned to guard himself more carefully than the open, optimistic boy I'd known. In several photos from charity events and business conferences, he was smiling, but the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He looked successful, accomplished, appropriately serious for a man managing billions of dollars in investments. He also looked lonely, though that might have been my own projection of what I wanted to see. The most recent photos showed him with Vivienne at various social events over the past 18 months. They looked good together, like a couple who belonged in the same world and understood each other's obligations. In most of the photos, they were holding hands or standing close together, presenting the kind of united front that high society couples were expected to maintain in public. But in one photo taken at a charity gala 3 months ago, I caught something that made my heart skip. Jasper was looking away from the camera, his attention caught by something or someone outside the frame, and his expression was unguarded for just a moment. He looked wistful, almost melancholy, like someone remembering something beautiful that he'd lost. I stared at that photo for a long time, wondering what he'd been thinking about in that unguarded moment, and hating myself for hoping it had been me. The final piece of my preparation involved a crash course in high-end catering protocols. I spent an afternoon at Prestige Catering's headquarters, learning how to carry multiple champagne flutes without spilling, how to navigate through crowds of people in formal wear, and how to respond appropriately to the kinds of requests I might receive from wealthy guests who were used to having their every need anticipated. The owner of Prestige Catering, a woman named Catherine Pemberton, was a perfectionist who'd built her company by understanding that the ultra-wealthy expected flawless service delivered with complete discretion. She ran her staff like a military operation, with detailed protocols for everything from how to address different types of guests to what to do if someone spilled wine on a designer gown. The most important thing, she told me during my training, is to remember that you're part of the scenery. These people don't want to think about the logistics of their events. They want everything to appear effortless, as if the champagne refills itself and the appetizers materialize through magic. Your job is to make that illusion possible. She assigned me to work directly under her head coordinator, a woman named Patricia, who'd been managing high-end events for 20 years, and had stories about everything from celebrity meltdowns to political scandals that had played out behind the scenes at supposedly civilized gatherings. Rich people, Patricia told me as we went over the timeline for Saturday's event, are just like everyone else except they have more money and fewer consequences for bad behavior. They fall in love with the wrong people, fight with their families, make terrible decisions when they're drunk, and hold grudges for decades over perceived slights. The only difference is that when they implode, it makes headlines. She was particularly interested in my thoughts about potential trouble spots for the Sterling Blackstone wedding. I've been watching Cordelia Sterling at events for 10 years, she said. She's usually the picture of grace and refinement, but she has a mean streak when she feels her family's reputation is threatened. If she's planning something, it'll be calculated to cause maximum damage with plausible deniability. That insight proved to be more accurate than either of us realized at the time. Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather, the kind of crisp autumn day that made everything look like it belonged in a magazine spread. I woke up early in my hotel room, chosen specifically because it was close enough to the Sterling estate for a quick commute, but far enough away that I wouldn't accidentally encounter any wedding guests in the lobby. I spent extra time getting ready, applying makeup with the kind of care I usually reserved for job interviews or first dates. The goal was to look professional and polished, but not memorable, attractive enough to blend in with the other staff, but not so striking that anyone would look twice. I pulled my dark hair back into a neat bun, chose understated jewelry, and put on the black dress and comfortable flats that Patricia had specified for the catering team. Looking at myself in the mirror, I felt like I was preparing for a performance. In a way, I suppose I was. For the next 8 hours, I would be playing the role of Elena, the catering coordinator. Not Elena, the woman whose heart had been broken by the groom 5 years ago. The drive to the Sterling estate took me through some of the most beautiful countryside I'd ever seen. Rolling hills dotted with horses and estate homes that looked like they'd been transplanted from English novels. The Sterling property was announced by massive iron gates that opened automatically as our catering trucks approached, apparently triggered by some kind of security system that had already verified our identities. The main house was even more impressive in person than it had been in the photographs Victoria's team had shown me. It was a perfect example of Georgian architecture, all symmetrical lines and elegant proportions, built from honey-colored stone that seemed to glow in the morning sunlight. The formal gardens surrounding it were masterpieces of landscape design, with perfectly maintained hedges, flower beds arranged in intricate patterns, and fountains that created a gentle background soundtrack of falling water. Patricia met our truck at the service entrance and immediately began organizing the team with military precision. There were 42 people working the event, from servers and bartenders to security personnel and coordination staff, and she knew exactly where each person needed to be at every moment of the day. "Elena," she said, handing me a tablet with the guest list and seating chart, "you'll be working the cocktail hour and reception. Your job is to make sure the champagne stations stay stocked, coordinate with the kitchen on appetizer timing, and keep an eye out for any issues that need management attention." She paused, giving me a meaningful look. "And if you see anything unusual, anything that seems like it might become a problem, you find me immediately." "Understood?" I nodded, hoping my nervousness wasn't obvious. The tablet felt heavy in my hands, not because of its physical weight, but because it represented my access to a world I'd spent 5 years trying to forget. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of activity, as the catering team transformed the estate's ballroom and adjoining terrace into a wedding venue that looked like something from a fairy tale. Florists arranged massive displays of white roses, peonies, and baby's breath that must have cost more than most people's cars. The lighting crew installed a system that would transition from natural daylight to romantic evening ambiance as the sun set. Tables were set with china that had been in the Sterling family for generations, crystal glasses that caught and reflected light like tiny prisms, and centerpieces that were works of art in their own right. I tried to stay focused on my tasks, but I couldn't shake the growing awareness that in a few hours, I would see Jasper again for the first time in 5 years. My stomach was a knot of anxiety and anticipation that made it difficult to eat the lunch Patricia had insisted all staff members take before the guests began arriving. At 3 o'clock, the wedding party began their preparations, and I caught my first glimpse of Vivienne Sterling as she moved through the house with her bridesmaids, all of them laughing and chattering with the kind of excitement that made me remember why weddings were supposed to be joyful occasions. She looked radiant in the way that brides are supposed to look, glowing with happiness and surrounded by people who loved her. I felt a stab of something that wasn't quite jealousy but was certainly painful. She seemed genuinely happy, genuinely in love, and that made everything more complicated. It would have been easier if this had felt like a business arrangement or a marriage of convenience. Instead, it looked like exactly what it was supposed to be. Two people who cared about each other celebrating the beginning of their life together. At 4:30, the guests began arriving, and I got my first real taste of the world Jasper had chosen over the life we'd planned together. These were people who moved through life with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money, never having to question whether they belonged in any space they chose to enter. They wore their wealth casually, in perfectly tailored clothes that whispered their expense and jewelry that had been passed down through generations. I recognized faces from newspaper society pages and magazine covers, tech entrepreneurs who'd founded companies worth billions, old money families whose names appeared on museum wings and university buildings, politicians whose decisions affected millions of lives, and celebrities whose personal dramas played out in tabloid headlines. They moved through the reception areas with the ease of people who'd been attending events like this their entire lives, air-kissing acquaintances, and engaging in conversations that probably influenced everything from stock prices to political campaigns. Working among them, I felt invisible in exactly the way Patricia had trained me to be. They looked through me when I refilled their champagne glasses, spoke around me when I adjusted floral arrangements, and discussed private family business as if I were a piece of furniture incapable of hearing or understanding their words. It was while refilling champagne at one of the terrace stations that I heard my first mention of Jasper's arrival. Two women in their 50s, both wearing the kind of understated designer dresses that cost more than most people's monthly salaries, were standing near the bar discussing the wedding with the casual cruelty that seemed to be a specialty of their social class. "I still can't believe Vivienne is going through with this," one of them was saying. "Cordelia must be beside herself." "Well, what choice does she have?" The other replied. "Vivienne's 28. If she doesn't marry soon, people will start to talk. And Jasper Blackstone is certainly wealthy enough, even if his money is rather new." "New money is one thing," the first woman said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "But I heard from Margaret Whitfield that there was some girl in college. Someone completely inappropriate. Cordelia had to have her investigated to make sure she wouldn't be a problem." My hands nearly dropped the champagne bottle I was holding. They'd had me investigated? The casual way they discussed invading someone's privacy, treating my life like a potential threat to be neutralized, made me feel sick. "Really?" The second woman leaned in closer. "What did they find?" "Nothing scandalous, unfortunately. Just a scholarship girl from Ohio who went into marketing after graduation." "But can you imagine? Vivienne could have ended up with a sister-in-law who works for a living." They both laughed as if this was the most ridiculous thing they'd ever heard, and I had to bite my tongue to keep from saying something that would blow my cover entirely. Instead, I finished refilling their glasses with a smile that felt like it might crack my face and moved on to the next station. But their conversation had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. The idea that Jasper's family had investigated me, that they'd treated our relationship like a problem to be solved rather than a connection between two people who loved each other, brought back all the pain and anger I'd thought I'd processed years ago. It also explained some things that had never made sense about our breakup. The way Jasper had seemed to pull away so suddenly in our final months together. The conversations that felt strained and careful. The sense that he was keeping secrets from me. I'd thought it was just the pressure of inheriting so much money and responsibility. I'd never considered that his family might have been actively working to end our relationship. At 5:15, a murmur went through the crowd, and I looked toward the main entrance to see the moment I'd been both dreading and anticipating for a week. Jasper had arrived. He looked exactly like himself, and completely different at the same time. He was still tall and lean, still had the dark hair that never quite stayed perfectly styled, and the warm brown eyes that had made me fall in love with him. But he carried himself with a new kind of authority. The bearing of someone who'd learned to command rooms full of powerful people and make decisions that affected thousands of lives. He was wearing a perfectly tailored tuxedo that probably cost more than I made in a month, and he moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of someone who belonged in this world completely. People gravitated toward him, wanting to shake his hand and congratulate him, and he responded with the kind of gracious charm that suggested he'd become very good at managing social obligations. But I could see something underneath the polished exterior, a tension in his shoulders and a carefulness in his smile that reminded me of the photos I'd studied during my preparation. He looked successful and accomplished and appropriately happy for a man about to marry the woman he loved. He also looked guarded in a way that the Jasper I'd known had never been. I tried to stay focused on my work, moving between the champagne stations and coordinating with the kitchen staff about appetizer timing. But my eyes kept drifting back to him, watching as he navigated conversations with business associates and family friends, as he posed for photographs with relatives, as he played the role of the perfect groom at the perfect high society wedding. He never looked in my direction, never seemed to notice the catering staff at all, and I told myself that was exactly what I'd wanted. The last thing I needed was for him to recognize me and create the kind of scene that Victoria had hired me to prevent. But part of me, the part that had never quite gotten over him, couldn't help feeling disappointed that 5 years of separation had made me so completely invisible to him. At 6 o'clock, the ceremony began, and I watched from the back of the garden as Vivienne walked down the aisle toward the man I'd once thought I would marry. She was breathtaking in her wedding dress, a creation of silk and lace that had probably been designed specifically for her and cost more than most people's cars. Her face was radiant with joy as she moved toward Jasper, who was waiting for her at the altar with an expression that looked like genuine happiness. The ceremony was beautiful in the way that money could make anything beautiful. The flowers were perfect, the music was performed by a string quartet that probably charged more for one wedding than most musicians made in a year, and the setting was like something from a magazine spread about fairy tale weddings. But watching Jasper promise to love and cherish Vivienne for the rest of his life, I felt something break inside me that I'd thought had already been broken years ago. This was really happening. The boy I'd loved, the man I'd thought I might spend my life with, was marrying someone else in front of 300 people who represented the world he'd chosen over everything we'd built together. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and Jasper kissed his new bride, the crowd erupted in applause, and I had to excuse myself to the bathroom to pull myself together. Looking at my reflection in the mirror, I realized that I'd made a terrible mistake in coming here. Some wounds don't heal from exposure to what caused them. Some pain only gets worse when you force yourself to watch the ending you'd hoped would never come. But I'd committed to this job, and I was going to see it through. Whatever Cordelia Sterling was planning, whatever scene Victoria's team had hired me to help manage, I would be ready. I owed that much to my professional integrity, even if my personal emotional state was falling apart. The reception was about to begin, and I had work to do. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.